Hey, J-Dub.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Mara.
Oh.
I see all the things.
Responding to the chat. A lot.
All right. Well, I guess we're all set here, John and Tara. Thank you so much for having us sponsor the digital stage. Just brought you guys all up for the member mobilization component of the event today. So I'm handing it over to you. Your tech is ready.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the America Makes Virtual Game Day. So this idea is really something we started. Audio does not sound good. Can everyone go on mute who is not talking? Hello? Perfect. So the idea of virtual game day is really building off of something that we started a year ago at Rapid. So we had a lot of success. We were able to connect with a number of folks who were doing things in additive manufacturing, had great intentions for what that was going to be this year, but obviously we all understand where we're at. So we're looking to build off of the platform and the idea. We're fortunate enough to connect with Link3D, who's been doing some of these different virtual activities over the past couple of months, and are starting to kind of dip our toe in the water to understand how to run a virtual event, what the value of it is, and really how do we get the community pulled together around this topic that we're all so interested in. So very happy to have over 300 people registered for the event. So hopefully we'll see more and more of those folks. We have well over 100 or 150, I think, already on right now. So hopefully we'll see many more filter in. Many of those folks are representatives of our member organizations, as well as a number of others in the additive manufacturing community. So what we want to do is spend the next couple of hours. We have 4 hours set aside. We're going to do a panel, talk through some of the work that we've been working on with the FDA, the VA, and NIH, directly related to the COVID-19 rapid response and how additive manufacturing has played a role there. One thing we want to spend, and why we've allotted a lot of time on the back end, is to bring people together. So one thing that we all understand and I think get tremendous value out of is having folks come together. We host a number of our own events where we're able to reconnect with folks, and when we obviously participate in many other events over the course of the year, and we're not able to do any of that right now. So what we want to do is utilize this platform as a way to reach out, and we'll talk through at the end of this really how that all is going to work. But hopefully you're already seeing some folks that you maybe haven't connected with in the last couple of months because of these crazy times. So we want to present the opportunity to do that in a safe and effective manner. So hopefully we all understand the last couple of months have been very different than what we're used to, and they've been quite difficult. Hopefully everyone is staying safe and been able to, find a way to respond. And one thing that I think we've noticed more than anything is how the additive manufacturing community as a whole has really stepped up. We're seeing our membership in the additive, larger community play a significant role in the response to COVID-19. There's quite a bit of activity going on all around us. If we were there virtually, we would give everyone a big, round of applause, virtual high fives. There's a lot to be proud of. I think in particular, if we want to focus a little bit more on the business and the kind of tech advancement side of what we're doing at the Institute and just in the community as a whole, additive manufacturing is really having a moment like no other in history, and we've heard multiple people say that. We've heard, many different organizations within our membership talk about that. We always hear, and 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were the new kid on the block. We were the emerging technology. We were the hot topic. Over the past few years, maybe that's waned. Maybe some hype has, died off, and other technologies have, started to come into the spotlight. But I think one thing that we've really noticed, and we're trying to, make sure we're capturing as accurately as we can, is that additive manufacturing has indeed, had more than its moment. It has, in fact, stood up and responded. It has played a prominent role in the response to COVID-19. So we know there's many different organizations who have contributed to that over the course of the last couple of months, some of which are members, others are not. But, one thing that we've done and what we've tried to do as part of this event is create an opportunity for folks to, for you to get a better understanding of what's going on, who's doing what. That really is where the next few hours come in post the actual panel event. We're going to be creating an opportunity to engage. So there is, if you've noticed, and I don't know if you've had the chance to bounce around from floor to floor yet, there's many different member organizations that have actually created tables. So a couple of our folks reached out over the past week as we developed this plan, and we have representatives from a handful of different organizations: Matter Hackers, Honeypoint 3D, Stratasys, Open Additive, Formaloy, the Barnes Group, AM Training, General Atomics, Blue Streak, Rolls-Royce, Vextex, REM. That's just a portion of the group that is playing a significant role in this response. So it's an opportunity for you to talk to those folks, really appreciate their involvement, certainly appreciate the membership's involvement as a whole in this, in the response. We also recognize that there are many, many organizations outside of those that I just, mentioned by name, or the stories that we hear on TV. There's dozens or realistically hundreds of different manufacturers across the country who have stepped up in some way. So one thing that we're wanting to do in light of that is really tell the larger narrative for additive manufacturing, and how and where has additive played a role in the response for this particular crisis, but obviously then looking forward, what is the opportunity, whether it is related to overall supply chain resiliency, or whether it's related to the response to a specific and new crisis that comes up. So I'd like to take a moment and introduce Tiffany Westbay, our membership director at America Makes. She's going to talk a little bit about the start of a new campaign that we're starting at the Institute called Membership Mobilization. So I'll hand it over to you, Tiffany.
Thanks, John, and hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in today. Excited to talk about membership mobilization, and basically, as you see this thing be unveiled throughout the next couple of months, what you're going to see is a strategic communications plan for the membership community. So what we're hoping to do is to increase that engagement between America Makes and the members, but to really capture your story as we move forward. So we know that everybody has been working, tirelessly on this response to COVID. So one of the first things we'd like to do is present the membership community with an online platform where you can upload your stories so that America Makes can then go promote those on your behalf. And of course, we'll give you cost share credit for your participation in that area. But in addition to that, there's several other things that we're going to be rolling out over the course of time here. And another thing that you're going to see is a closer connection between the membership community and the America Makes leadership team. So you can look forward to hearing from our directors and senior program managers as they reach out to you to really try to understand your organization and your needs and how we can play together better in this space. Also, another large thing that I'm getting ready to kick off towards the end of the summer is a membership portal. And this is going to be where the members can connect with one another on a regular basis, and we can just keep that engagement strong all throughout the year. One last thing that I'd like to mention, I'm also putting together a membership working group. And this is so that we can hear from the voice of our membership what we need to do to continue to evolve our membership model to continue to be meeting your needs on a regular basis. So we do have a table set up. It's on the first floor. It's table 104. So I encourage you during the networking break, stop by and ask questions and just let us know, how we can be there to help you. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Yeah, we're really excited. I mean, one of the most, kind of remarkable things that have come out of all of this has been the response. It's really the reason that we got involved in the first place. We're going into week 9 of this crazy COVID response. And, you know, we've been working very closely with the group that we're going to talk about here in a second, but it all really started because we reached out to members up front to understand what they're doing, how they're responding, ways they wanted to help but weren't sure how to help. And that's really what got us initiated in this in the response process, and what helped us drive to the path that we ended up ultimately taking. So thank you. Appreciate everyone kind of understanding, and look forward to more information coming out, Tiffany. So up next, I would like to introduce Wohlers Associates. We have the fortune of having Terry of Wohlers participate, and ultimately he's going to help us moderate the panel discussion. So I'd like to bring Terry to the stage. There's a virtual stage screen. And Terry's gonna facilitate the discussion between the 4 panelists from FDA, VA, and NIH, and myself as well, to talk through how our organizations came together to ultimately provide some support against the fight against COVID. So I see Matthew Prima from FDA on. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Beth Ripley and Meghan McCarthy. Hi, team. And Terry should be joining here, hopefully.
Perfect. Terry will be joining in for my audio. And Megan, we need you to use one of the audios. Perfect. Great. All right, Terry, are you able to make a sound? Just doing a little sound check here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect.
Is this all right?
This is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Terry has this internet scenario right now. So his voice will be coming through my image. So please ignore my face in here. Thank you. Okay. So the floor is yours, Terry. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, hello everyone. It's great to be here. How's the audio? Is it okay?
Is audio all right, everybody? Just want to. Yep. Yes.
Enough.
Okay, good. So some good news and bad news. Laying down optical fiber throughout Fort Collins, Colorado, so we'll have a gigabit speed. And yeah, we're looking forward to that. The bad news is that it's happening today, last week, this week, and so forth. They severed a cable last week, and I thought, oh, the worst case scenario could happen today. And then what do you know? Just 3 minutes into the event, and it looks like the internet went down. So it may return, but for now, we'll use the method that we're using. So thanks everyone for being a part of this very important program. I'm very excited to be a part of it. We have great panelists, experts in their own right, and just really thrilled to be a part of this. I'd like to start by asking a question about the response from American Makes, which I find very interesting. Can you, John, or anyone really give some background on what it has achieved today, or what it hopes to achieve in the future? And then also maybe many of us are familiar with the TRL, MRL levels of 1 to 9. 1 really being a concept of an idea of a new product or service, and then 9 being in full commercial service. And if you could maybe try to rank the response to date from 1 to 9 in terms of its maturity, that'd be great. So John or whomever would like to respond to the question.
Sure. No, appreciate it. Thanks, Terry. Sorry we can't see your smiling face, but appreciate you joining and moderating this. So the response to date, something that we've coined as the Advanced Manufacturing Crisis Production Response, is really about how do those motivated manufacturers and designers who want to contribute understand where and how to contribute. And we've seen, tremendous interest, first and foremost, in what we're doing collectively. It's really, like I'd mentioned, what drove us to the point of trying to put all of this together in the first place. We knew of, we America Makes knew of the other organizations and this particular skill sets that they have. However, we hadn't, really come together around what a solution would look like. But then as we reached out more and more to our membership, we found out people who were ready to dedicate pieces of equipment, engineers, designs, etc., to the cause ultimately. So what that forced us to do is put together really an idea around, some obstacles that we felt needed to be overcome, and then enable us as a community to make a next step. So in an attempt to do that, we pulled all of our organizations together. I think we've been working, it's been a pleasure to work with the team for, going on our 9th week now. So every day we've something we started, tagged up and kind of talk through what the hot button issues are of the day. But through all of that, we on kind of the America Makes side and really closely partnered with NIH had put together, this idea of an AMCPR portal, and a place where validated designs can live. And I think it's honestly been the most impactful activity to date, because all of those evaluated designs and vetted at some level create a level of trust within the community. And really the trust is built off of the backbone that is the testing and evaluation that comes from the VA side of the house. So all of that wrapped in some guidance or exposure to requirements and regulatory concerns from the FDA, we've been able to bring that information forward. And I've said this repeatedly, but the whole idea was to lower the barriers to entry for the manufacturing community so they knew where they could engage. I would be lying if I pretended that this was all easy and it's all done. I think that we've found quite a bit of success in items like face shields. Masks have proven to be harder. As you move to more and more complicated components, that's even more difficult. So MRL, TRL level, I think, for face shields, we're high. For other components, high meaning production ready. For others, we're probably in the 5-6 zone. I think one thing that we've seen overall is many of the folks within the community who are responding are not traditional medical device manufacturers or folks that are familiar with the regulatory concerns of producing a medical device. So there's been a lot of training and education that has come out of that. But from a TRL development point of view, we've seen a number of designs iterate and go back and forth and be matured to the point that we're, have designs that we've been able to get put up on the NIH site, and they're readily and open to the community to actually manufacture.
Great, thanks, John. That's very helpful. Good background information. Dr. Ripley, this is for you. What were some unexpected successes to date that you can name associated with this effort?
Well, I think one of the most exciting and unexpected successes has to do with how designs have evolved very rapidly to meet this crisis. And I'm gonna give an example. For face shields, face shields have been the way they are for, years. But when we were forced to redesign them, several manufacturers paired up with hospital staff. And through that, we realized, there's a few important considerations. Like you need to be able to put a mask under that face shield. So you need a step off on the forehead. You need to be able to put, glasses, or certain surgeons have loops. So you need that step off. But then as you do that, you provide a spot at the top where you could have, fluids or something get in. So they then designed on top of that a way to put a visor across it so that they could protect against that. And they came up with a really cool, I think, enhanced product And that happened in 2 separate instances in 2 different designs that are on the website that have been really popular across multiple hospitals. And, that happened in the course of days. And I think forced to readdress products and redesign products, people have been really creative and open to talking with the end users, and that's gotten us some new designs.
Thank you, Dr. Ripley. That's helpful. It's yeah. If you haven't gone to the NIH 3D Print Exchange, it's something that you should take a look at. It's really well done, I think, and I'm sure it will continue to grow, expand, and become even more useful in the future. So this is for really any one of our panelists. What are among the biggest challenges this program has faced that you did not anticipate? Maybe some surprises that came your way over the last few weeks?
I could say one. I think we did. I think personally, at least, we had no idea just how big the output would be. There are hundreds, over 500 designs on this website. Really amazing work. And I think we were just not ready for the sheer number of designs and interest in the site, hits to the site, et cetera. So we found ourselves rapidly trying to think, how are we going to evaluate hundreds of designs, from a very small agile team? So that was definitely a surprise to me. I don't know what the rest of the group thinks.
And I can add to that. Hopefully, can you guys hear me now? Oh, okay. Technical issues solved just in time. Yeah, so I mean, from the implementation perspective of the website, we had a huge increase in users. It was really great. As soon as the FDA put out the MOU, we had 27,000 hits, and for us, that's a lot. So we even had to bump up our cloud infrastructure to handle that. But it's been really exciting, and I'll add to what Beth was saying about the number of entries. There's right as of this morning, we have 523. 18 of those have the kind of clinical review, that assessment stamp from the VA. There's 14 for community use, and I think it's been really exciting. It was a lot. We sort of opened the floodgates, but there's been a lot of interaction from users. Just even the main collection page itself has almost 200,000 views. So it's been exciting.
Thank you, Megan, for that. I was about to ask you about the numbers and page views, downloads, et cetera. So you're a step ahead of me. So thank you very much. Matthew, does this pathway replace or duplicate the FDA review process of these devices? And how does the memorandum of understanding fit in the FDA regulatory framework? Could you address those 2 questions?
Certainly, and thank you so much for asking those. So I think it's very important for everyone in the community to understand that the products that we're looking at through the NIH Print Exchange and this MOU are ones that would not traditionally need a review from the FDA, or in some cases, based on current pandemic guidances or EUAs, those pre-market review requirements are being waived. So in normal situations, face shields and some face masks would not go to the FDA for pre-market review. So these are the products that we've really targeted through this MOU. So we're not replacing or creating any sort of parallel review path. As John said, we're really creating this sort of trusted repository of designs and even now manufacturing instructions for these products. So, manufacturers can go and use them with some level of assurance that they're going to perform as they're expected to.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. In terms of the impact of the program and printed PPE and other products too, such as ventilator parts, what impact has it had on the U.S., different U.S. supply chains for parts and PPE products. You know, is it filling a genuine void? And have you been able to try to quantify the impact?
I'll take a first swing at that as probably the one who can the safest to answer. So we've certainly seen it make an impact, and I think it's something that as we look through product prioritization over the last last month and a half, it's really been about what is that next problem that can be addressed. So I mean we've seen it play a significant role, and we've said this already a couple of times, in face shields. I mean, it is clearly demonstrating filling a gap in the conventional supply chain for face shields. We have countless stories. Many of the folks who are doing that great work are on the phone today, and I've seen them already pop up in the chat window, or they have different tables. We're not the ones producing those components. We're trying to make sure people understand what to produce to fill that gap. But, I think overall, the technology, we've seen it show up in a variety of ways. We've seen it show up in its, very traditional prototyping, in the very traditional prototyping space. So how are we using additive to very quickly iterate on designs that maybe aren't printed in the long run at all, but they're rapidly iterated so that we can move them over to injection molding, and we've seen some good cases of that. We've certainly, as in the case of face shields and even face masks, have seen the space of the term bridge production. So that time between when the existing supply chain, based on our current set of suppliers, and the conventional supply chain catches up. We've seen additive, play honestly a major role in that, and there's countless good news stories out there about how people are doing that. And then there's some cases where we're actively investigating what AM's long-term role is as it relates to either updated or new designs for components. So some of those are yet to be proven, so we need to watch out how excited we are over them, but there's certainly an opportunity in that space. To try to quantify it in numbers, that's been difficult. We have some understanding of what the folks who've registered through our system have identified as capacity. We've certainly seen some of the cases from manufacturers who have put together success stories on the order of hundreds of thousands of units of things like face shield, and now you're starting to see more face masks and things like that. But to give you here's the number and where the impact is, that would be I don't think we're ready to do that. Hopefully we'll learn more over the course of today and following days as people kind of step up and self-identify, so we have a better understanding of what that looks like. I think for us, it's very important that we do tell that story, though, because we want people to understand that additive, maybe more so than some other technologies, really stepped up to the call that ultimately leads to, longer term viability, more investment, more R&D investment, more investment in training, being able to pivot a production line more quickly, all of the things that we've seen both work in areas of opportunity that, maybe we struggled with, but could address through additive.
And I could just follow up with just a few impactful things beyond just getting designs out there. The ways that I think that additive has been critical in this PPE shortage and other aspects are, one, just as John said, this is untapped manufacturing capability across the country at a time when the traditional manufacturers are, really pressed to put out products. So I think the ability to rapidly tap into that manufacturing capacity is huge. Second, the ability to kind of turn on a dime for what you're producing. It may be face shields this week, but next week it's masks, and the week after it's ventilators. You don't know. That ability to be so agile in the manufacturing process is key. And then number three, I think, is just what I was alluding to before, the rapid design iterations that can be done with additive.
And Terry, I'll just add, we've had a lot of emails to you know, through our contact information of this site asking, you know, hey, where can I get these things? Where can I get them printed? I probably have had 3 or 4 emails just in the last day or two, you know, from people asking about it, including this morning, it was someone in South Africa. So it's been interesting too, to see that there is a global interest in this and really kind of showing the need for it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's good to see so many people networking and sharing ideas and problems and solutions to them. So that's great. I think in the future, you know, looking ahead, it'll be even more vital to have a better set of metrics to really gauge the impact of this, so that we can plan ahead. So my next couple of questions really have to do with the segmentation of how the site is put together, or at least the response from American Made. So really, the 3 being designers, manufacturers, and then of course ultimately the healthcare providers, the recipients of these parts and products. And I think this question is probably best for John. How are you trying to provide direction to the design community who wants to provide support? So we have this, you know, hundreds, thousands, probably tens of thousands of designers out there worldwide. How are you providing them direction so that they can help with this effort?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think it's something Beth kind of alluded to. You know, having 500 designs is great, and that is you know, a metric. Whether they're all, you know, focused on the right things, and there's a lot of, you know, the nice thing within those 500, there's a lot of, you know, riffing, if you will, off of different designs. So there's multiple iterations and improvements and design improvements and fit changes and those kinds of things, which, you know, we've seen that get better week after week as we've shared more and more information about, you know, both what we're looking for, and then as we get more info back from the VA on the different testing and evaluation that they're doing, that all gets pushed forward. But, you know, one thing that we've done through the idea of kind of
bear with me here.
No
We're back. So hello, everyone.
We're live. Okay.
I just want to kill the phone here. And I think I can do that if I can. There we go.
He's alive. Okay. So you know, one thing that we've seen through looking at prioritization of product, meaning what is the next priority, is, you know, it was just 2 weeks, I guess 3 weeks ago now, maybe. Beth brought to our team during one of our morning tag ups this feedback around fit of face masks, and that although they may be good designs for one person, they may not fit a very large portion of the population. So within a couple of days and going back and forth with her team, we identified the idea to put together something we ultimately called the Fit to Face Challenge. And the whole idea with whether it's this or, you know, the next thing, or there's a couple other great challenges out there right now, it's about getting that design community focus. You know, we want people who are wanting to work on the right things. And that's the most important thing here. We don't need a, you know, 60 and 70th version of something. Instead, we need to get that design community focused on the right thing. So this Fit the Face Challenge really focused on putting together responses around a series of different characteristics we actually made available, and through some collaboration with NIOSH, they made available to our community the 5 head forms that they use to evaluate fit of face mask. And there's, you know, really just 5 different sizes, from large to small to wide to narrow. And the challenge to the community was develop a solution that fits as large of a portion of the population as you can. And through that work, we were able to, and this is all just hot off the presses, so we're live announcing, the designs that were identified as top designs, and these are not in any particular order, but there were 3 designs that fell into that category. 2 of them were something called the moldable mask. It was a large version and a small version of the moldable mask, and it is by CMU, Carnegie Mellon submitted that solution. And then the third is Vader, and that is what's classified as a small mask. And we required through them to submit them against a variety of categories, and that was by Alliance PCB Solutions. So those 3, we haven't even communicated to them yet, as far as I know. So if you're out there, congrats. We'll be providing some more feedback. We have some, feedback on what was great about them, some things that, need tweaked. There's a couple of things more that, although they had really good fit, there were some other things that need to be improved. But hopefully those will turn into designs that we make available to the community here very quickly on the NIH site as well. There were 3 other groups that were classified as kind of honorable mention. Again, there was a large and a small from a mask called the Flex Fit, and that was by Re3D Incorporated. And then the third was a mask called the Every Mask, which was submitted by a team at NIST, actually. So across those 6 different masks, there were, those were kind of the identified as best in class. Again, we have some what's good and what needs tweaked on those. There's, across the rest of the masks, there were some really interesting ideas. So we'll be feeding back some information to that group as well. But the whole idea is get the community who wants to help focused on where we need help, and then transition to the next item. So we're already talking about what those next transition points are while we're continuing to work through this one.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, it's great that this has come about, and I'm just hopeful that it continues into the foreseeable future. So speaking of design and then the relationship with manufacturers, how does that work? What's the relationship? Anyone, John or any one of the panelists could jump in on this.
Well, I'll take the first swing since it's probably off of our site mainly that we're talking. Okay. So there's 500 or so manufacturers who have in some way self-identified and went out and filled out this, the template for I can make X, Y, and Z. We, again, something like all of this that we rapidly iterated and matured our thinking on as we collected information. We now have that set up where, company ABC can go out and say, I can manufacture this NIH, 013492 at X hundreds or thousands of units per day, per week, or, however you want to designate. So we get some understanding of capacity. Ultimately, that is helping us connect to the folks on the healthcare side who are asking for things in a similar manner by this particular design, or I need a face shield. I don't care which one it is. One of these 5 are the ones that are approved, so or have made it through the review process. I need 10,000 of those. I will tell you that one of the most powerful things that we've seen. I'd be interested in others' feedback here because we're all getting this communication from people. Is whether they're matched through our site or not is not important at all. Whether that matching is happening is what's important, and there are so many stories that we're seeing out there from random town anywhere in the US or really across the globe who are talking about, I use this NIH, design. We had a meeting with one of the bigger PPE groups in the country right now, last Friday. Almost every single design that they're referring to people is from the NIH site. So that's really where the power comes in. People understand that there is a resource. This has a lot of powerful implications for the future as well, but there is a resource where I can go and get trusted information and then go and take the next step to try to help somebody or potentially manufacture some goods somebody needs.
We're getting some good questions from those who are attending today, and one is where can we view the preferred fit to face designs? I'm guessing they're not yet available. Is that right? No?
They are not yet available. The intention is we will have a information on our site at americanmakes.us. Thank you, Amy Good, at Fit to Face. And then as we go through and iterate with teams, and there were some really interesting designs that were different than what we had seen from the previous submissions. The intention, and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, there'll be a flag within the NIH site where you can go very easily get access.
Thankfully, my wife was in the adjacent room, so I was able to grab her and say, would you please get on the phone with Comcast right away and see what's up with this? And yes, she was successful, so hopefully it'll continue for a while here. Another good question has to do with providing these products to healthcare providers. Can you expand to others, such as grocery workers and other service providers that may come into contact with people? Is that a possible plan in the future?
Well, I'll just comment on that, Terry. I think, given we have this broad spectrum of people, from industry manufacturers to, maker spaces and individuals who are trying to help fill that gap. And I think there's a real need, there's a real opportunity for the kind of, everyday maker and individual to fill that gap when perhaps they maybe don't have the technology, or, they have a desktop printer and they want to be able to, maybe they don't have the best materials to make an actual mask, a surgical mask, but that they can actually go out and help fill that gap when the healthcare workers are trying to get stuff through the larger supply chain. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and even places besides grocery workers, restaurant servers, prisons, things like that are sort of being left behind as we're trying to prioritize the healthcare workers.
I think it's very important to point out on the NIH Print Exchange, there is a category for community use. And I fully understand the comment about healthcare, and, based off of, NIH, VA, and FDA, we're very much looking at the sort of requirements for using PPE in healthcare or medical purposes. But when, there are looser restrictions when you're not planning on using these in a healthcare setting, and that's where the community use category came in. So while we've been focused certainly on the sort of healthcare and medical side, there are a number of products that have been sort of tested and deemed appropriate for community use.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So, the stakes are very high when the intended purpose of a device is to provide this barrier from a highly infectious pathogen. Maybe, Dr. Ripley, you can perhaps comment, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, is this something that, how do we deal with this as a community, as a healthcare worker? I mean, obviously, certain masks have certain levels of clearance from your organization or another regulatory body, but can you provide some commentary on that?
So I think, again, the most important thing that we can do is try to give some clarity on which designs are the safest. And that was part of our intent to, moving out of the gate with this. But there's challenge in that because who knows, starting from scratch here, because, before COVID-19, we were not using additive to make things like face shields and face masks. So I think, it's a balancing act between understanding some of the limitations and the not knowns, and trying to protect frontline staff. And, we started this with the idea of better than a bandana, which I think is actually a good way to think about it. And we've kind of refined from there. So one of the most important things to do, I think, and for all the designers out there, is to really think about what are the key critical features or elements that these devices need to do. And one of the key critical elements for face masks in a healthcare provider's setting is to protect against liquids. So, blood, sputum, other kind of bodily liquids that could be splashing in the face, and also filtration from bacteria, et cetera. So these are some of the things that we had to rapidly spin up and try to understand how can we test that, and how do we validate that.
Okay, so this is a follow-up question. It came in from one of the participants here, one of the attendees rather. On the 3D printing exchange from NIH, what was the criteria used for the reviewed for clinical use category? So there's two categories: reviewed for clinical use and then the broader community use. What criteria was used for the clinical use PPE?
So for the clinical use, the first category was to look through the FDA emergency regulations or guidelines and understand from those documents what was needed for different devices. So let's just say masks, face masks, and there are standards that these need to meet. This includes, as I mentioned, liquid barrier protection, bacterial filtration. You need to be able to breathe across it, right? So impermeable mask is not useful if you can't breathe, flammability, etc. So we started from those features, and then what we added in on top of that was understanding how does it actually work in a clinical scenario. And one of the key features with the VA team is that we took these devices out into the hospital space in a controlled way and solicited frontline staff feedback. So, can you put it on easily? Is it uncomfortable? Does it inhibit you from doing the work you need to do? How long can it last? And so we tried to bring in, beyond the standards that the device needed to meet, we tried to bring in that real world scenario and expertise from that frontline staff to truly say, yes, this is not only technically a good product, but I would want to wear this product. And I think that's kind of the key, and why you see, it takes a little bit of time to get all of that together, but I think it's time well spent to get PPE that not only functions, but that people want to use.
Thank you, Dr. Ripley. So we'll talk about PPE a lot, but I want to shift at least for a couple of minutes to parts for ventilators. Is there a liability in hosting models such as ventilator parts? Does having them on the NIH site give a false sense of security? Meghan, can you address that?
Sure. Yeah, this was actually a big topic of discussion because part of this effort was help people get access to things that are tested and safe. And obviously there's quite there's a very high level of risk when someone is on a ventilator and you're using a part that is maybe not necessarily vetted. But we recognize that this is a global resource. So while these things may not be cleared by the FDA or covered under an emergency use authorization, there's no reason for us to stop someone from using it elsewhere where they are maybe more desperate for resources. And as far as the liability, we see the designs themselves, the files are not harmful. It's really us, we want to make sure that people understand that this is not, NIH or FDA or VA approved, so it's got a warning label on it, but that, at least the designs are there that maybe people will go and, like John was saying, riff on those and remix and be able to come up with, open source solutions that can undergo more testing. But, as far as putting them out there, I think I'd like to see that, just if in the event that it would be useful to someone, and we know the the ventilator parts that they printed in Italy when they could not get something from the original manufacturer, that did save lives.
Yeah, can you brief everyone on that? I know some of you are familiar with that, but that was one of the first stories I read, and I was intrigued by it, and then some of the follow-up activity that occurred as a result of the Italian individual, small company there who created this valve for this ventilator. You probably took a closer look at it than myself, Megan, or maybe any one of you.
I had a look at it, but I don't know that I would want to speak authoritatively on the story. I kind of kept up with it, how it was happening, and that it did have an impact. But we've been really mired down with things at this site at that time when it came out. But there is, I believe, the valve that they used is submitted is on the website.
Okay, so it was reported, I don't know, I read about it, maybe it was weeks ago now, that PVA, it's a company in New York, is manufacturing a $6,000 emergency ventilator, which is based on MIT's open source event design that was developed about, I want to say around 10 years ago. And the company claims it is the very first non-medical device company in the US to receive a fast-track certification from the FDA to make ventilators. Do you know when, where, and how this product will be used? Matthew. So if you...
Oh, I am the AM person. I am not the ventilator person.
Okay.
That being said, the FDA has a very good website on all the emergency use authorizations that it's issued, and we periodically update all of the appendices, especially for the ventilators, with what's been approved, what they've been approved for. So while I am in no position to directly answer that question, now the FDA has been very transparent with the emergency use authorizations, and all the publicly available information will be up there.
Does anyone else want to comment on how an emergency ventilator is used out in the field? I assume probably not in a hospital. Maybe, I really don't know, but maybe Dr. Ripley, do you know, or?
Probably outside of I'm a radiologist by training, so.
Ah, okay. All right.
I don't know either, but I'll say the one thing that has been fantastic over the past, couple of months is, I'm regularly the one on the call with these other three folks who doesn't know this world at all. So I speak for the common manufacturer regularly in asking questions. And ultimately our goal is to try to get answers to things like what you just asked, Terry, so that we can share it. I think the FDA has done a great job in trying to communicate. This is all, especially in the early weeks. I mean, it was changing by the day and hour in some cases, and guidances were changed or things were, relaxed at some level. And there was no yes or no answer to anything. I mean, it was just complicated. But one thing that we've tried to do, and you'll see some changes. We just rolled out some changes on our site. The NIH site has changed quite a bit over the last week, and there's a couple more changes coming that really speak to what should I be making. If I'm a manufacturer, I've always tried to summarize it in this simple way. I want to help. That's at its simplest form. I want to do some good. I can make something, but I don't know where I should be making something. And I might traditionally make things for aerospace or automotive, and I have quality systems and I know how to make good components, but I'm just not familiar with this world. I think that's been one of the, you asked this a little earlier, and I was going to answer with this same type of answer. That's been the most eye-opening part of this experience. I think the ability to communicate to those, manufacturers outside of the world of medical manufacturers that don't know, like myself, up until a month or so ago, or a month and a half, what GMP was. I mean, that community, good manufacturing practices, it's just not a common terminology, although they very well may have in place a quality system that is very comparable and traditionally manufactures things that go on aircraft. So being able to to get that story in the position that people knew where to engage and where they should not engage, because we certainly don't want to be part of the stories where people are throwing away PPE that was delivered because nobody knew how or where it was manufactured and if it was safe to use. I mean, we've always stood by the whole reason that we're doing this is to make sure that healthcare workers and now the greater public is able to get the product that they need so that they can operate in a safe and effective manner. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's been complicated, but I think we've collectively put together some resources to help answer your question.
And I think an important follow-up to that is to think about what we're trying to do. Our intent here is to try to put some clarity around those complex questions about how do we make these things, are they safe or not? I think the bottom line is everything is a risk benefit alternative type of scenario. So you have to think, what are the benefits of what I'm doing and what are the risks, and weigh those. And I think what we often forget in that scenario is the alternatives. Is there an alternative, a viable alternative? And if the answer is there's benefit, there's less risk, there's no viable alternative, then you should do it. And I think one thing I would like to message is that our site is there to try to help do some of that, but we are not there to approve or, say what you should and shouldn't do. So even if it's not on our site and you've done the benefit risk analysis and you've got something good, please don't feel that you can't move forward without us. We're here to help, but I think that's one thing I want to message is that, we can only get through so much at one point, and we're all kind of trying to figure this out and work our way through it. And so at the end of the day, even if it's on our site or not, that benefit risk alternative is really the North Star for all of this.
Good point. Well said.
One quick thing, Terry, sorry. That is, again, like Beth just said, that's why we got into this in the first place. It was about 2 months ago, to this past weekend, that we'd talked to a whole bunch of members. They said they wanted to help in ways A through Z, but we didn't know what to go do. We didn't know what regulatory, what the rule space looked like. We didn't know where to go to get access to information. And we had no idea what the demand was really. So where should we contribute? So that ultimately got put together in a document that was, submitted via a letter to the FDA that said, we need to know answers to these questions. We know some folks at NIH, they've got a tool that can help us with this. We've got experience in working with something similar. We can pull the community together. There are manufacturers who are ready to respond. We need to understand how to get engaged, where to get access to trusted data, and then ultimately, where can I direct my support? And the next day, literally, I got a phone call from the FDA, and this all started. And that Monday, we've been on the phone this is our 9th week now of talking every single day, kind of trying to come up with this solution. But it was all really about, the reason we got engaged was because our membership and the additive community wanted and was willing to help, but didn't know how to direct that support.
I remember exactly when that happened. That was it was right after that Friday that you and I and Andrew spoke. And yeah, I don't know. That was yeah. I'm glad that you went for it, because I probably haven't slept much since, or I don't know. But hey, this is from a healthcare person. I'm not sure what her job is. Her first name is Rena, and she wants to know if it's possible to take advantage of making custom masks and face shields for hospital healthcare providers. And I think she, follow-up question. Are hospitals 3D printing masks and shields? I know some are, of course, like Mayo Clinic, they have a large laboratory, but would someone like to take those two questions?
So I'll jump in. So I'll have to open with the FDA response first. So that would be a patient or a surgeon matched It wouldn't technically be called custom. And right now, for some of the face masks, and FDA has guidance out, and we actually broke all face masks into 4 categories. Some of those can be made anywhere, non-GMP. You don't need to register and list. Same thing for face shields. So from a regulatory perspective, you can make those products anywhere. I think the real question for a hospital to ask is it worth our staff's time and capabilities to be making those products? The sort of next challenge is AM is a great technology for making patient or surgical matched products. That being said, it's still going to be a lot slower to scan, design, and then produce, an individual mask for each surgeon. So I think the answer here is, it really depends on what your facility's needs are. And as Beth said earlier about that benefit risk analysis, does it make sense for you to do it? From both a regulatory and technology perspective, that's pretty straightforward for some of these products, but it really comes down to, does it make sense for you to do that?
Okay, this also relates to making masks. This is from John, who's with us today. He starts out by saying, better than a bandana. Is there a way of certifying or claiming better than a bandana? Matthew?
I'm staring at Beth for that one. So I think some context for everyone. In the early days, the CDC released a document on alternatives to PPE. And for face masks, their recommendation was, if you have nothing else available, wear a bandana. So for a lot of the community use and even some of the non-surgical medical face masks, is really to make sure that it's better than a bandana. And how you do that.
So that comes down to the testing criteria. And early on in this game, we didn't have access to a lot of the more quantitative tests, the ASTM standards that you would need. So, a lot of our testing early on was really real world scenarios. Since then, we've gotten more sophisticated. We've found partners across multiple organizations, many partners within the DoD that have helped us to do some more quantifying tests. So better than a bandana, right? I think there's 2 things you want a mask to do. One is source control. So that would be you're wearing the mask to protect everyone around you so you don't spread it to them. So that's one scenario. And then there's the mask that you're wearing to protect yourself from getting the virus. Those are 2 different things with different scenarios. But if we go with either one of them, the question really has to do with stopping the movement of, cough, liquids, etc., through the mask. And so though we have not put bandanas through a rigorous test, we actually are interested in doing that and are trying to do those studies now so that we could truly tell you what better than a bandana is. But before we get to that, it's really asking the questions of what is the device have to do, and then finding the right test to prove that it does those things, and then ranking which items have met that standard.
That's helpful. My next question is for Meghan. Meghan, I think you said your boss is Dr. Fauci, is that right?
So yes, within the NIH, I'm with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. So Dr. Fauci is my boss's boss's boss. Yeah, and he's truly wonderful. We're very, very proud of him and everything that he's done over the last wherever we are now, 3, 4, or we're going into month 5 of this. He's really fantastic.
Yeah. So the question is this: where did it go? So what is the value of the NIH 3D print exchange rather than an open repository such as Thingiverse, PinShape, GrabCAD, and there's a host of others?
So we launched this site it was in 2014. So 2013, this idea started bouncing around that we saw these other sites, and there just wasn't a lot of sort of biologically relevant and kind of scientifically accurate models. And then also we wanted a place that would sort of target the scientific and medical community, and also support custom labware. So that was kind of, where we were going, and given the feedback that we got from the advisory board and building that and other users, was that the idea of having, a unique database identifier and something coming from the NIH with the idea that it has a little more kind of authority if you are, publishing in a manuscript linking to that rather than somewhere else, that ID doesn't necessarily, not everything on the site is coming from the NIH or is reviewed, and I'm talking about the site overall. But yeah, I think it's been interesting to see people really having value in this being, coming from a resource such as the NIH that has been kind of validating. And like Beth said, people should go and print whatever they want, but just the idea that this is, an NIH supported resource, it seems to, our feedback is that that there's value in that.
Sorry, I have to be the FDA person on the panel. When Meghan says people should go ahead and print whatever they want, it's going to be within, what's appropriate and within the label and, within what, the current regulations allow.
Yes, thank you, Matthew.
Thing. So one thing that we actually, in order to support that'll come out today or tomorrow through us, and we'll going to be shared with NIH is, and we've worked back and forth is, what are those considerations that I need to have? There's still, no matter what, some basic requirements for most items, unless you're giving it to, in replacement of a bandana for someone going out to the grocery store. But if it's going to be used in a certain setting, they still need to be labeled properly. They still need to be tracked properly. There's some, what are very basic things that the community that does it every day are maybe not front of mind for those who are just trying to help. So we actually put something together. We put something together with NIH to try to respond to that. And it's just simple. It didn't end up being, I think, the top 10, but it's the top 11, things you need to consider when you're wanting to do good. So some of those basic things to make sure you're covering your bases.
I was going to say this question toward the end, because I have a group of questions that really look into the future. But I'm going to ask this one now because 6 people have voted in favor of us addressing it. Do we think this activity, the activity of American Makes and these regulatory and other healthcare agencies will create a change on the medical industry adoption, given additive manufacturing can do things not previously considered or previously possible?
So I think that's going to be a little bit of a hard one to address, because the medical or at least the medical device industry has already very much adopted AM across a number of areas. I mean, if you look at sort of orthopedic devices in general, we see a huge number of products being made. And I mean, we're talking, serious medical implants, hearing aids, dental are mostly made using AM today. The dental industry has been huge adopters of AM. So I think, if we were to sort of break this down, I think there's some segments of the medical device industry that are more likely to consider AM as a result of this pandemic. But generally, the medical industry has already, been significant adopters of this technology over the last 5 years.
Good point.
I'll just add that, this is not, this supply chain gap is not something that, this isn't new. This, we encountered this in the H1N1 epidemic in 2009 and to a lesser extent Ebola in 2014. And I think the lessons learned that come out of this, now that we have, AM technology is much more widespread, the ability to be able to kind of pivot from whatever you were making before, to be able to, ramp up production on something else in a different way. I think the lessons learned that come out of this and being able to mobilize very quickly are, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that and whether or not this continues with AM on a regular basis, but, is undetermined. But it does prove that in future, when there is this gap, there will be sort of the guidance will be able to respond more quickly to give the manufacturers more information faster, the designs, the instructions on what they can do to fill that gap. Because like John said, there were people that had capabilities but didn't know exactly what to print or who to get it to. So I think this is going to be really impactful in the long run. Hopefully we're never in this situation again, but it'll be interesting to see what comes from that. I'm excited to learn that.
Agree, totally. So this is from Cynthia. She says that John mentioned looking for the next big item that might be needed. I read this weekend that there could be a critical shortage of syringes once a vaccine is found. Is this something that could be, and then the rest of the message, let's see, can I read? It stopped there for me anyway. So I think we have enough of it though. Does someone want to talk about the production of syringes? Not all at once.
I'll just step in quickly. Some of this comes down to, we have AM, but you could print it, but should you print it, and how much could you scale that up? So I think it would depend on materials and what's your capabilities. I mean, if you can injection mold something, you'll get there faster. But obviously we're seeing that if things are happening in a pinch, I think with syringes, it would probably come down to materials and what kind of printer technology you're using, that you have something that is sterilizable and reliable structurally for those purposes.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down, like you say, does it make sense? 3D printing is a good fit for many types of parts and products, but not all. And this may or may not be a good fit. Let's see. So, do we think this activity will create change? Asked that one already. Here's another one. Bless you, John. How was this initiative affected, or how has this initiative affected the site, the NIH site? This is really for you, Meghan. And how might you do things in the future on the NIH 3D print exchange?
So it's been an interesting exercise for us because I mentioned, the interest, really the open source hardware community was really focused on custom labware. So how can you MacGyver the, the equipment you need for your experiment in a really custom way? We had never really thought about putting a label on things. The terms and conditions are, don't be upset if this breaks your $100,000 centrifuge, but now, we're kind of looking at things and saying, well, if we get more of these devices, like ventilator parts and things that we're not quite sure about, that we will have to put a label on those. And that was something that we kind of never really had to do or hadn't considered before. Everything's sort of use at your own risk. But I think as we go into this, people sharing the open source medical devices, we really are going to have to think a lot more carefully about that and how we give people the right information. Which is why we're so lucky to have a direct line to the FDA.
Yes. Speaking of which, Matthew, I think you may have shared this with me. As a public-private partnership, what are the differences in engaging government and industry entities? Now we're referring to American Make, so this is I think John will probably be in the best position to answer this, but what are the differences in engaging government and industry entities now during a pandemic versus a non-pandemic circumstance or circumstances? Did you get that, John?
I thought you were asking Matthew. I was wondering how he was going to respond to that. No, I mean, it is it is, these are admittedly are organizations that we've worked with at some level on, very specific things in the past, but never at the level we are right now. I think the value that we've been able to play has been that, or hopefully is, hopefully others are seeing it this way, is the bridge between the organizations, and they certainly work very well together and know each other for years outside of us being involved in any way. But I think us sitting off to the side, we have the ability, and we talk very regularly to our membership community and those from industry who are producing components, who have questions. It was eye-opening, I'll say to say the least, I guess, when this all first started. I would have companies with 4 and 5 and 6 employees calling up asking almost the same exact question as a Fortune 100 company. The biggest players in the in AM, we'll just say generically. I think that put us in a unique position to be able to take that input from the community, whether it's, part manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, material, to be able to be the voice of that community and bring it forward to the folks who are, working through these scenarios and decision-making and guidances, et cetera. Granted, that doesn't in any way circumvent the process of a manufacturer's got an idea that they take to the FDA. That's not, we're not breaking the system or trying to change the system per se, but I think the ability to have us pivot and talk to both sides, of that public-private partnership helped it, hopefully make things move along more quickly than we could have otherwise.
So this is an interesting question from John. This is John without an H. America Makes is paving the way for additive manufacturing businesses, underscored uppercase, boldface businesses. But what about additive manufacturing humanitarian volunteers, underscored uppercase, boldface humanitarian volunteers, a potentially enormous global resource?
I'll take a swing at that. So since our name was in the lead-in, so I think that's one thing we've admittedly, I don't want to say struggled with, but we've been working through, because we're not that connected to that community, and we're certainly interested in not just their voice, but what they're doing and where they're trying to help, and we've seen an overwhelming involvement on the humanitarian side, and we've talked to a number of the groups who are directly focused at purely the humanitarian side of things. At the end of the day, the product that they're delivering needs to be safe and effective. That's ultimately, we're all operating under the same guidelines, that we're producing components, whether you're giving it away, doing it at cost, or making a business out of it. We all need to follow the same guidelines. And I think that's something that we have from the very beginning kind of instilled within our group, across our teams and the folks that we're working with, to make sure that we stay focused and go work on those, the right next thing is really how we focused on, especially early on, is we don't know what's going to happen 2 and 3 days from now. We need to just answer the next question, and really trying to serve as a resource to share that information the best we could. And admittedly, I'm sure we fell down along the way, but it was changing so rapidly and still continues to. We're trying to work the best we can. Nobody wants to be doing this work. I mean, that's something that I think everyone has realized, that this is has been a fantastic response, but it's not necessarily what anyone wants to be spending their time doing, specifically focused on this problem. It's key now to transition that, and how do we recover and become more resilient. So I think the most valuable thing that's come out of it has been the kind of trusted repository, that whether you're looking to donate it or build a group of folks to come together to make X number of units for your local hospital or to send overseas, it's still all about that trusted design and data. Or if you're looking to, manufacture to meet a need, that's fine. So I think our stance doesn't change. Not sure if that directly addressed their question or not.
No. Okay, this is from Mike. He asks, as a new startup in the 3D printing space, how does one go about producing products for FDA, NIH, and the VA?
All right, so I'll start. So I think the first thing to understand is you're outside of things that the NIH and the VA are buying for their own sort of clinical use, right? We're not talking about producing products to be used by us, right? We're really looking at trying to sort of fill the gap for these low-risk products. So on the America Makes website, there is a manufacturer sign-up portal, so you can sign up and say, these are what our capabilities are, these are the products we can make, some rough numbers. So in one sense, that's how you can go about getting involved. On the other aspect, if you're interested in submitting designs, you can do that through America Makes, or you can also do that through the NIH Print Exchange. Now, the one caveat is, these are going to be those low-risk products that I already mentioned that don't need a traditional FDA review. If you need a traditional FDA review, or if you need emergency use authorization, that still comes through the FDA, the traditional pathways.
Megan, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think, it is important. Well, and I don't want to, Matthew, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe from our discussions before is that to get that certification of good manufacturing practices to make some of these devices, after these emergency use authorizations, the EUAs, are when this emergency is over and those are rolled back, so they're no longer waived. That there is a process for that I don't believe is necessarily prohibitive to a startup or a group that wants to go in and continue doing this as their main line, as a line of business. So Matthew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe comment on that process.
I'm not going to try to quote the statistics that I don't fully remember, but a vast majority of the regulated medical device industry are small companies. So there's a lot in place to make it accessible and easy for small companies to engage and interact with the FDA. And I think what this conversation is sort of underscoring is manufacturing medical devices is complicated. Through this MOU, we've tried to sort of decomplicate it for certain spaces of products. But at the end of the day, when you're manufacturing medical devices, you're manufacturing medical devices, and there's a lot of FDA regulations around that activity.
Yeah.
But please don't be scared. We're here to help both through the MOU and at the these, very needed products can make it to the market or the clinical space.
I'm going to shift now a bit more into the future. Do you see long-term sustainability or sustainable business models being created using AM as a result of the pandemic? Let me repeat that. Do you see long-term sustainable business models being created using additive manufacturing as a result of the pandemic?
So I'll step in there with a comment. This is so, we really don't know where we're going with this, like how long we all will be wearing surgical masks, or not necessarily but face masks or something, these community use even to the grocery store when, we're interacting with others. I think that's still, things are starting to reopen. We'll say, we don't know. I mean, a vaccine would be January, I think, at the earliest. So I think it's interesting to see in this the way the economy is right now, are the, say, like small businesses or other groups that are jumping in to fill this gap is maybe that will become something that allows them, does that become a way for them to, replace whatever business they were doing before? Even there's been upholsterers who have started, switching from, people aren't concerned about, their furniture right now, that making surgical masks. And will there be a transition and something that may actually help bolster the economy for some of these areas in manufacturing?
Yeah, I think the jury's still out on specific products. There's certainly been a lot of interesting innovation as a result of device shortages. So the question is going to be, in a year when traditional manufacturing has sort of caught up, do those innovative designs that you can only make using additive, are they still cost effective, and then do they stick around? I think the distributed manufacturing approach that AM brings is also going to be very attractive, especially when you start thinking about, can we bring things on board? And, this was very much a global pandemic. But if you think of regional disasters, if you have one plant making all of your products and, there's a earthquake, hurricane, massive blizzard that shuts you down, does the distributed manufacturing approach suddenly start looking more attractive? So, I think there's lots of changes that, AM could bring based on people's experience from the pandemic. I think we're too close to, fully understand what's going to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned the distributed manufacturing, and a lot of people have asked about, what makes 3D printing different than conventional manufacturing in the at this particular time of a pandemic. And, certainly that is one. And of course, I think you mentioned, or someone earlier, about the ability to very quickly iterate new designs and get something in your hands quickly. And once you have that design, then you can start manufacturing product. You don't have to wait for tooling or some supplier to respond. You can go to work on it right away, assuming you have access to equipment and materials and know how to operate them. So it really does provide, some unique benefits, and hopefully we can learn from that. Hopefully this will develop a sort of a supply chain to what you're doing together, so that if this happens maybe at another time, or even in another situation entirely that we have not foreseen, that you'll have a lot of the parts in place to be able to respond more quickly. So related to that, do you think that this will have a broader impact now that companies see how supply chains can be disrupted? Because I think a lot of it's just, we take a lot of these things for granted, that we can just get this stuff, whether it's food or medicine or PPE, that it's just there and we can get it. Now that many of us have maybe a better appreciation for this supply chain disruption, do you see that AM as being a solution for other products and industries besides healthcare type products?
Yeah, so I think, we're certainly seeing this. When this all first got started, we talked a lot about distributed manufacturing and where does additive fit in. And I think we're all plenty aware that additive is a manufacturing process that needs to be paired in most cases with other. There's certainly opportunities where it stands alone more than it does, depending on what the response is. But, ultimately, we know there will be more disruptions, whether they're related to a crisis or something else. There's going to be disruption. Additive has already proven that it can make an impact here. What we, for this particular type of issue, what we need to think about is what is our preparation process for future crises look like? How do we identify what the roadmap or strategy ultimately look like? How do we have in place something like a, model repository? So for this situation, NIH has been an invaluable resource, and we would not be able to, people would not be able to deliver the product that they've been able to without it. So looking back at, or looking at developing an after action report or lessons learned, how do we make sure that we start to at least start the discussion and then put in place those things so that we have this type of, digital seed bank, or however you want to describe it, but something where the items are that you can get access to. And there's lots of access controls and information around, how much data is involved in the tech data package and those kind of things. But ultimately, we need a plan, we need a roadmap, we need a repository, we need a playbook. We need to figure out how to go and execute against this thing. However, at the same time, that's, what is good for crisis response is certainly good for supply chain resiliency. So right now we're working through this, response portion of the problem. Hopefully we're moving into the recovery portion of this COVID response. And ultimately, looking forward, we've got to be positioned that we're looking into the resiliency side of things. So I got asked here last week by a couple of different folks, as we're talking to some different folks in Congress who are talking about some bills and legislation, how do we utilize this, and what is the potential impact, to your point, of just general, ability of a supply chain to be more agile? How do they respond based on a demand that has nothing to do with whether there was an earthquake or a health issue, but their business needs to pivot very quickly? What can we learn from this to make sure that we're better able to do that? And ultimately, where does additive fit in? Where does digital data fit in? They all fit very nicely together. Additive happens to be a way to get your head around how to use that digital data and ultimately produce a component. So tons to learn here. I think ultimately we've got a lot of focus on what we're doing. We need to look forward at how do we scale that up? Like, how do we actually build it into some enduring infrastructure that we can take advantage of in the long run? And then how do we pressure test that whole system and exercise capability so that we're not, building it as we, try to fly it like we have all been for the past couple of months.
Yeah, good point. So this next question is from Prabir, but before I ask it, his question has to do with mobilizing hospitals to take on more 3D printing. And the last I read, and it might have been from you, Matthew, or someone else, that 160 hospitals now have some form of 3D printing capability within the hospital. Is that number fairly close to being accurate?
At this point, that number seems low.
Yeah, could be.
Outside of COVID, the FDA has been spending a lot of time working on figuring out how to ensure that manufacturing, specifically 3D printing at the point of care, is done under the most appropriate way. Because lots of hospitals are doing this. The FDA was floating around a proposed sort of policy framework. We've actually been getting a lot of good input from people. I'd say the one perk to the COVID response is we're seeing a lot more hospitals get very interested in this, and we're hoping we can sort of learn from the community about their experiences with this. Now, I'll say an upside to this is most of what hospitals are currently printing are falling in that very low risk category where sort of anyone can print it. It's going to be much more interesting when hospitals want to start printing higher risk products. And then we're going to have to sort of get a better understanding of sort of the existing regulatory space that hospitals are under, educate them about what the FDA requirements are. And, in a perfect world, there will be multiple sort of regulatory options that a hospital could decide to go with based off of, what the broader industry support is and the specific products that they want to make.
So higher risk products such as orthopedic implants, for example.
Certainly implants. There are some, and I always cringe when I start talking about surgical models because that gets very confusing for people. But there are different ways to use surgical models, and those dictate, the appropriate level of risk. Specifically for surgical models, there are cleared FDA software that if you use it, if you use it per its label, you're the user of a medical product, which provides some clarity. But we're looking at everything from implants to cutting guides, most prosthetics already fall outside of the realm of what you would need, but if you make them fancy enough, you might need, the classification would increase. So we're trying to be more agnostic to specific products and try to sort of say, based on the benefit risk profile and the regulatory classification of these products, these are ways that you as a hospital could sort of make these products, with the end goal of making sure that, we never want a patient to have to ask, is this traditionally made, is this 3D printed, or is this 3D printed at the hospital? They should have the same level of assurance about that product quality and safety.
Okay. By the way, the 160 hospitals, those will be in the U.S. only. So there's, I'm sure, many outside the U.S., but just within the U.S. So, but like you say, it's probably a low number because that might have been published more than a year ago. So back to Prabir's question, following in the future 3D printing for healthcare, the healthcare industry, is there an NIH or America Makes effort to encourage, motivate, or mobilize hospitals to take on more 3D printing activities?
So I'll just say, as far as what we've been doing with my group, the NIH 3D Print Exchange, that we've been really trying to just kind of help raise adoption. And but I've been involved with several working groups the last couple of years, especially with Matthew and with Beth and others. But just trying to get more of this out there and help people. It's several years ago, it was just the Wild West. People were getting 3D printers and kind of going off, and it was exciting to see that innovation in technology. But also, like Matthew said, you kind of have to make sure that everyone knows exactly what they're doing. So the NIH doesn't really have any specific kind of campaign for this, but I'm certainly involved in some different working groups and trying to keep our finger on the pulse of things that we can help facilitate that moving forward.
Good. John?
Yeah, so I mean, admittedly, this is an area where there hasn't been a tremendous amount of activity. Although I'll tell you, a year ago, it was at Rapid, a handful of orgs kind of reached out and started asking questions. We know there's quite a bit of activity going on in this space, but I think from our point of view at the Institute, although we tried a few years ago and we did some preliminary road mapping specific to medical and what does it mean and what are the roadblocks, we haven't had a lot of activity in that space since then. So like Meghan mentioned, there's a number of different groups out there working this. There is a workshop that we're participating in or part of with, I think, probably quite a few others on the phone. The AM medical workshop that ASME is putting on here in, I guess, 16 days or somewhere in that neighborhood. One thing that we're trying to do as part of that is collect inputs, and whether it's through that group or other groups, and there are a handful doing this, we want to get that information and then align it back to our roadmap so that we're better able to, from a national tech development roadmap point of view, understand where we're at, what are the, are there design limit, restrictions that are preventing us from being able to do that? What are the, qualification certification is always the big sticking point for insert any industry here, kind of problems. We are looking and will be increasing activity from the Institute's point of view in the coming months.
Good. So do you see the response from America Makes as something that will continue into 2021 and beyond?
So the, direct to COVID, I pray that we're not still dealing with it. And I mean, even orders of magnitude smaller than what it's been lately, honestly. From what are the kinds of things that an institute should work on, and how do we better focus on convening, coordinating, and catalyzing an industry around problems? Yes, absolutely. I think we've in some cases, as an institute, we were well positioned, and hopefully we've stepped up at some level and done some good, along with working ultimately through membership and the other government agencies. There's also things that I think we've realized now that we're starting to collect as part of this lessons learned that we haven't been very well positioned to do. So we're taking a hard look at what that is. To directly answer the question, I think we, if required, to still have the ability to match folks and make available information, we will find a way to do that. I certainly hope we're not doing the same thing, but we're instead looking at how are we implementing the technology and recovering and working on supply chain resiliency more, and doing that as a community. So we're focused on the right thing, and then ultimately sharing that information so others and the community at large benefit.
This question is from Pete. Pete asks, do you think manufacturers will invest in supply chain risk management solutions to provide a competitive advantage? Will government apply pressure on companies to demonstrate the supply chain risk management resiliency? Maybe from our government friends, Meghan or Matthew?
That's outside of the FDA purview.
Yeah. John or Meghan, were you shaking your head, or?
I mean, the NIH does not, we actually don't put out any kind of regulatory guidance per se. So I don't know that, I'm not sure what would come into play there, but.
Okay. So this question I've been wanting to ask for some time. We touched on it a while back, maybe toward the first 20 minutes or so. It's from Mara, and she asks, can you describe the impact of the demand side of the America Makes platform? What hospitals have hospitals been requesting, and how much of that demand has been met? And then, any learnings or insight that we can provide as a result of this effort would be appreciated.
Yeah, so thank you, Mara, and thanks. You guys have been doing a ton of awesome work. And one of the earliest designs to get on the site. So to answer the question, though, this has honestly been the most complicated, one of the more complicated sides of what we're trying to do. The demand signal has not been very pure. It has been, even in cases where institutions have reached out, we've found, they've found difficulty in procuring things outside of their conventional supply chain. So certainly depends on how urgent the need was. Obviously, as the urgency went up, they figured out how to knock down some of the roadblocks. But I mean, we have not seen a tremendous level of inputs into the system. I don't know what the exact number is we're at right now, but it's in the low hundreds of thousands of units. Although we did just get a big request yesterday, primarily almost exclusively face shields and face masks. And also we've seen quite a few ear strap tensioning. I can't remember what we call those, but between those three items, that is the comfort straps, that is kind of the highest level of interest. The way we've been dealing with it, because recognizing we're not in the position to go off and let specific contracts out to answer a question, is it's been a little bit difficult. So we make, as this most recent ask was 100,000 face shields a month. We're identify manufacturers. Typically, we're trying to do it in a geographic region because it just makes the most sense, recognizing that it's a regional fight and we're seeing it all over the country. We would then say, here's the 10 or 12 or 15 manufacturers who have raised their hands that have direct capacity to address your need. And then we ask them, hand over that information, they go follow up. We then, reach back, regularly to try to understand where they're at. In some cases, they've found conventional sources, so it eliminated their need. In other cases, they've been matched. We're not directly seeing the one-to-one. Is it a 50% hit rate? We've like everyone's been so busy. We reach out a lot and haven't heard back whether they've been successful or not. So we certainly have cases where it is. I think our best cases, honestly, are from the membership side of things, where they are themselves off and working with their local hospitals or a system or network to get those answers. We've tried every angle you can imagine, from dealing with FEMA to the regional directors to the state level to local platforms. Without a national approach, it led everyone to go off in a different direction. So we've been just trying to reach out as many ways as possible to make sure they knew the capacity and capability that existed, and then we passed that information directly over.
We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and this is one that's thought-provoking. You can agree or disagree with the sort of the genesis of the question or what's behind it, but I'm going to ask it, even though it might be somewhat controversial. Biology aside, this crisis suggests that our medical, industrial, regulatory infrastructure has been deficient. Beyond temporary relaxation, what needs to be fixed?
So I'm going to step back and say, broadly speaking, the FDA has been watching with some level of concern with the sort of challenges, especially on the drug side, right? Where if you have one facility making a critical drug, suddenly that supply chain becomes very vulnerable. So I think, this has been sort of an ongoing issue as, things consolidate and we sort of become highly reliant on a few locations to manufacture critical products. Outside of sort of recognizing the need, and I always cringe when drug people speak to devices, so I'll now, of course, speak to the drugs. I know my colleagues on the drug side have been very interested in making sure that there are alternatives to some of these supply chains, or we can work with people to ensure that there's sufficient capacity to make critical drugs when there are shortages. Outside of sort of those efforts, the FDA's job is generally to make sure the products coming to the market are safe and effective. We do less on the side of making sure that the products can be manufactured. So I think it's a tricky question that has a lot of economic as well as sort of regulatory factors sort of stacked on each other.
Right, Megan or John?
I was going to let you go, Megan.
I don't have anything to speak to that, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the NIH. So
yeah, I think the what Matthew brought up is the one area, and we capture it all in general, terminology of supply chain resiliency and where are we at and what should we be considering. We certainly know and have seen some of the cases that have happened before our eyes and potentially put us in a very vulnerable position. And, that can be the case, whether it's because of this type of, component or some other. I mean, we've seen it happen to all types of supply chains because of natural disasters and things like that, where it kind of cripples an industry. So I won't comment on regulatory changes that need to be done to, better distribute that. However, I think we're certainly seeing a increased interest in, how do we enable, manufacturers to be agile enough and, competitive enough that you can make that a viable option. And And certainly a lot more goes into it than that. But, I think that's the side of things that we're looking at more so than what we believe should be changed in regulatory policy.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. So this has to do with public-private partnerships and distributed manufacturing. Are we going to see more of both in the future, both in and outside of disaster scenarios?
So I'm hoping that we're a test case of how public-private partnerships can be valuable and where they can help bring together, all sides of the, community in a response. And, we know that what works here isn't necessarily have anything to do with what's going to work in another area. So I would imagine that there is a lot of opportunity. I think more than anything, one thing we know we can control is our ability to collect the, I've said it a couple of times now, but after action report of what has worked and where were we well positioned and where are we deficient. I think it is enabling, it will enable us as a group of manufacturing innovation institutes, both in the Department of Defense and more broadly across Manufacturing USA, to understand where we fit in. And certainly we've discovered some things that we're not very well positioned to deal with right now. So I think I hope the answer to that is yes, and we've proven that there is value. And I think we have opened, collectively, I will not take any of the claim for this, but opened a lot of doors and got a lot of people connected through this process. And I think we're in a unique position to do that, where a direct government agency, that's more difficult from time to time to do that. So hopefully we'll come out of this better off and have a better documented process or playbook on how we execute in the future.
I want to add to that, Terry, just in general, I don't think there's no way this effort could not have happened without these 4 different groups coming together. None of us really could have done this on our own. So I think it's a great example of, not just industry and government, but also interdepartmental and interagency within government. Just that, we said it's kind of NASA interested in helping out in some ways. And then, of course, different groups within the Department of Defense. We said it was like Avengers Assemble, because it was just these different groups and everyone has their own niche and their own role to play. And I think, it's certainly necessary to have all those aspects, and industry I think there's a very important role that, government can do a lot, but we can't do everything.
Yeah.
My sort of final thought on this would be, FDA's been a member of America Makes for years now. We're very involved with Nimble. We're involved with the other institutes, and between this team, FDA, VA, and NIH have been talking about 3D printing for 7 years, 8 years now. We are very sort of interconnected. So it was sort of an easy-ish step for us to take those pre-existing relationships and bring them together. And I think the big thing that America Makes brings is, they're tied in with a lot more people than we are, and they're able to sort of make a lot of introductions and bridge, the relationship gaps that we didn't necessarily have before the pandemic.
Yeah, good point, Matthew. We have one more question, but I first want to thank all of you, Meghan at NIH, Matthew at FDA, Beth, Ripley at VA, and of course, John at America Makes, for making this possible. You provided a great deal of insight. We appreciate it very much. The final question is, I'd like, if you would, all 4 of you to weigh in on this. No matter if you've been in it into 3D printing and additive manufacturing for a few years or many, many years. will we look back at this time as a turning point in the AM industry?
I'll go first. Yes, I absolutely think that we will. I think I was so caught up in what we were doing until just a couple of weeks ago, and we, were able to pick our head up for a second, and we were in a meeting with a series of different members, and we started talking about this very topic. And I absolutely think that we're going to come out of this. We have proven the validity of the technology. Somebody in that meeting phrased it as, we're not just about trinkets, and our circles who understand the technology, that's long since been a concern, but we still fight it. If you go out there and talk to folks in the public, it's still a pretty unknown technology other than it makes trinkets and toys. However, in this case, we've seen a tremendous response. And I think in one day, I barely ever get to watch the news, but I was watching it. Back-to-back stories on national news featured 3D printers and how they're directly responding. I think this is going to open a lot of folks' eyes to the capabilities of the technology and ultimately its play in kind of long-term manufacturing, community.
I certainly think that there's going to be some great lessons learned and coming out of this on just how can we mobilize really quickly in response to these, maybe not just a pandemic event, but like Matthew mentioned, other emergencies like hurricanes and quakes, is to have people ready to do that. And I think that's going to be the real lasting impact here.
Yeah, good.
I think I'm going to second what John said. I think the change is going to be much more on awareness. I still get questions from people about when's the FDA going to clear the first 3D printed medical device. And it's like, well, boy, that was like 15 years ago. So I don't think there's going to be a huge shift in the industry. I think there's going to be a much bigger shift in the awareness of where the industry's at.
Could not agree more with all three of you. So thank you very, very much for your time, your expertise, and your willingness to share your insights. I've been told that we have some great virtual networking opportunities coming up. So I'm now going to turn this back over to Tara and Janet. So I'll let them take it from here. And thank you all for your attention. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you again, John, Terry, Megan, Beth, Matthew, and Tara for putting this together. We're super excited that we can help sponsor the digital stage and also the digital community. So like you said, Terry, you're right. We now have upcoming the virtual networking area to help everyone interested in enabling the COVID-19 response to gather together and share what you're working on and also some of the challenges you're trying to overcome as well. So I would like to introduce everybody to Andira Schroeder, who heads up our marketing here at Link3D, who will share a little bit about how the virtual networking happens so that you can all have a very fruitful experience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Janet, and thank you all for joining today. I've shared my screen just to show you the instructions a little bit closer, so you can expand that by clicking the arrows in the top right corner of my shared screen if you want to see a little bit closer. So just before we get started, I was going to give you guys a little bit instructions. So as we finish the presenter mode, we will be in the networking session where you will be able to see tables, which act as small meeting rooms where up to 6 people are able to join per table and virtually network through video chat. So you can join different tables by double clicking into them. There's also 5 floors available, and you can move between the floors by clicking on the floor numbers on the left side of the screen. So next, you can turn on your camera and mic by clicking the icons at the bottom of the screen. There's also 2 different modes where you can view the networking sessions. So if you click tile view, you can bring up the people in your table where you can see them a little bit closer, and you can click back to map to view the map again. And And then as many of you have already been using, there's also a chat function where you can message everyone that's in the conference by using the general chat. You can message per table as well as message people individually. And then lastly, for the best experience, we recommend updating your profile. So you can click the top right icon in the top right corner of your screen and add a profile picture, connect your LinkedIn, connect a meeting